Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm joined today by
Jonathan Edens.
Psychiatric.
I'm a
physician.
psychiatric PA.
Yes, thank you. Just so that we can get our credentials out of the way. And today we are going to be talking about supplements. And this is something that a lot of people, I think, have some misconceptions about, but we're going to be talking about some reasons that you should consider not taking them, and also some reasons that you should consider taking them. And so I think there's two sides to the coin, and we want to try to help people understand the pros and cons. So Jonathan, I'd love to hear some of your takes on why people should be careful when it comes to supplements, because a lot of times people think, oh yeah, it's just a supplement, it can't hurt me, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that. There are some things we need to be aware of.
Absolutely. And even though we are, mental health professionals, and we're kind of more so specifically talking about mental health supplements, these things that we're going to discuss are really kind of broad generalities that can be associated with the entire supplement industry. So the first major consideration when you're considering taking a supplement, and one of the biggest downsides, particularly something that's often cited by other practitioners, is the fact that there's a lack of regulation by the FDA with the supplement industry. So this can lead to a variety of different problems. When with prescription medications, the FDA has very strict standards that these manufacturers have to meet. So whether it be a brand or a generic, there's going to be testing that assures that you're actually getting what you think you're picking up from the pharmacy. So with supplement manufacturers, while there are certain regulations, it doesn't have the same degree of regulation that we see with the FDA. And so this can lead to things like inconsistent quality. All right. Do you have any comment on that, Dr. Binus?
Yeah. I do see that as a concern, although some people might be happy that something's finally not regulated by the FDA because they don't trust the FDA or whatever. But in reality, the FDA actually does ensure a certain level of quality, a certain level of safety for the consumer. And, if things aren't regulated, you don't always know what you're getting. And that can include, of course, not only quality, but even quantity as well. Because with medications, for example, you have to, even the generic ones have to meet certain criteria to be allowed on the market. With supplements, it's kind of pretty haphazard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And really, at least within the supplement industry, even though there's not this sort of standardized approach like we get with pharmaceuticals, there is still certifications that different manufacturers can apply for. And so they will have that higher level of standardization and testing that you may not see with every single provider. Now, there are certain online websites like Amazon.com that requires that you actually are getting it. You're getting a certain certifications from your manufacturer when you're listing your supplement on their website. So, it kind of depends on where you buy these things from, but since you really generally don't know who manufactures the supplement you're getting, usually the brand is not doing the manufacturing. They're actually parsing that out to a third party in order to get that done. And so you're really kind of in the dark, so to speak, because you really don't know who actually did where it was brought together and compounded, and then who tested it, if it was a third party or the manufacturer, or if it was really tested at all. That's general practice, but not always the case.
Right. Yeah. And so the bottom line is you don't always know what you're getting, but of course, if you go on Amazon, you can usually tell if it's a decent quality, if there's like 1,000 reviews that are pretty positive, but even then, as consumers, most people don't really know, okay, what certification do I look for and that sort of thing. And so there are ways to kind of, mitigate some of the risk there, but it's just, an area of concern that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, specifically when it comes to supplements, a lot of these manufacturers do have this certification, but you want to look for CGMP. So that means Certified Good Manufacturing Practice. And so there's particular things that the supplement manufacturer has to do every single year, and they're getting basically a third party that comes in periodically to make sure that they're up to that they're meeting those standards in order to get that. Another one is NSF. So that's another degree of certification that is also another thing that when seen on a bottle, that means that they're following kind of the highest standards.
Isn't the NSF even kind of a higher
level?
It's
a little bit of a higher level than the CGMP as well.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
So the CGMP I generally, I sort of recommend as like the baseline that they should have, on a supplement bottle.
Got it. Other concerns. I think we have 5 of them that we want to talk about.
Yeah. In addition to sort of the lack of regulation does lead to, a lot of creators or formulators of these particular supplements where there's not a whole lot of resistance for them necessarily jumping into the market. Right. And so, kind of that stereotypical, the guy in his mother's basement, right? He can get online, he can find a manufacturer. And as long as he has the initial funds and the idea of a formula in mind, like he can probably find a manufacturer that's going to make it for him. And so, a lot of these individuals, they may not really know much about the research behind a lot of these ingredients, and they may just be, stuffing pills with inadequate doses or really insufficient or subpar ingredients just to try to make a quick buck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really, I mean, research obviously is pretty expensive, right? So for most people, even if they're not the guy in mom's basement, it's easy to kind of be tempted and say, well, let me poke around a little bit online. Oh yeah, I think I'll put a little this, a little that, without really knowing how these supplements can, especially if there's multiple ingredients, how they interact with each other, what the effect is going to be on people, et cetera.
Yeah. And one positive thing I'll say about this is, especially with sort of our capitalistic society, the better products do tend to sort of flush out a lot of those bad ones, especially on a platform. I know we keep mentioning Amazon, but like Amazon, where there's reviews and you get sort of hundreds or thousands of reviews over time, that can really be a good aggregator that can push out some of those really inadequate products over the course of time. However, that being said, not all reviews on Amazon are necessarily accurate. A lot of them are fabricated, and a lot of those top selling products, maybe they have a large presence off of Amazon or some other platform where they can sell a lot of them, but they're really, in my opinion, a lot of them are fairly poorly designed as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you have lack of FDA regulation, not a lot of good research, generally speaking. And then what's the third element?
So the third element would be for a lot of my patients or clients, just in general, the lay public that isn't familiar with the research on specific supplements, like it can be really confusing and overwhelming. It can be, in my opinion, as overwhelming, if not maybe even sometimes more so than even prescription medication. The FDA, they estimated, and this was back in 2000, they were suggesting that there's over 29,000 different dietary supplements.
Wow. And that was back in 2000.
That was back in 2000.
I mean, you can imagine things have really exploded since then because, so there's probably, who knows how many now.
Well, they were saying even at the time that there's an average of around 1,000 new products, per year coming out at that time. So, I mean, we could probably safely estimate, clearly between 30 to 40,000 at this time that are probably available to the consumer.
Wow.
And as a comparison, this was recently, the FDA was also saying that there was about 20,000 prescription drug products approved. And, this number was pretty hard to find. It was listed on the FDA website, but it didn't actually break down, was this purely prescriptions for humans versus also for animals, and it also said drug products, so I know that there could probably be various iterations of that, but essentially what we're trying to say is there's a lot of both.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, supplements, there's actually more in terms of overall quantity of different ingredients available to a consumer. So, with so many choices, like what do you take? That can be extremely confusing.
So how do you figure out what to take?
That's a really good question, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit in a later podcast. But basically, for my own personal experience, it really comes down to just doing adequate research, and using a combination. As we said, there's not a whole lot of research on certain supplements, and so you have to use wisdom and your judgment. But a lot of times using the available research in combination with a lot of sort of an aggregate of anecdotal evidence is really, how you can, in my estimation, find kind of the best supplements available.
And I know you spend hours looking at this stuff, and you have the mental health background.
Yeah.
And still, I'm sure sometimes it can be confusing. So I can only imagine how that is for the average person that may not have the science background, and they're trying to wade through all this evidence, and a lot of it's anecdotal to really figure out, okay, what's going to actually help me personally. And, in my experience, I've actually found that, going through the research myself, but then really when it comes to making recommendations or dealing with patients, I think it can be ideal to have a second set of eyes. In other words, someone that really has done more research and also has the background knowledge from a scientific basis. That I think is the ideal way to get some recommendations as far as what supplements might be tailored for you.
Yeah. And I would just add to that, if you're going to reach out to see a medical professional about supplementation, this is not something that we're necessarily taught in school. And so really most medical professionals that know anything about supplements, it's all self-taught. I've had many patients come to me that have told me their other prescribers basically told them, it's not FDA regulated, so you shouldn't be taking any supplements. And that just to me shows, I think, laziness, negligence, and because there is a lot of research, with some of these supplements. And, yes, it's not always as good, and maybe it is biased, but that can also be said about pharmaceuticals as well.
That's
and
right.
So I think you just need to use a healthy dose of discretion, and actually dive into some of the research and get accustomed with it. But a lot of providers aren't necessarily comfortable with doing that.
So what's the fourth concern that you would have as far as dealing with supplements?
So supplements are not, they're not completely benign in terms of their negative effects, right? They can have serious side effects, and it really depends on the supplement. It depends on your health status. So it's not super simple to just say you should avoid this particular supplement. But sometimes it's going to be a little bit more nuanced than that.
But it's natural.
But yeah, and so are a lot of poisons, right? So these are things that you do want to know what you're doing, and if you need that additional accountability, talk to somebody that kind of knows your health status, that is also familiar with what they're doing. But specifically, like some of the things that certain really more toxic supplements can cause can be things like liver damage, right? Can be long-term liver damage.
Kava, right?
Kava can definitely, Kava can cause liver damage. Mania is another thing, specifically here in psychiatry. We have to be concerned with patients that have bipolar disorder, because there's really very little amount of evidence when it comes to supplementation and bipolar disorder. And even though there are a number of supplements that are used to treat depression, that may not mean it's a good thing to try if you're in fact bipolar.
Right. I mean, just like an antidepressant, giving an antidepressant to somebody that has bipolar, some of the supplements can be potent enough to, if someone's sensitive enough, that to actually trigger someone into a mania. I mean, I'm thinking about things potentially like SAMe or St. John's wort. I mean, you have to be careful with those things, that they can trigger people sometimes.
And I'm glad you brought up the St. John's wort, because I was going to bring that up in our next point, which is, these things, while they can cause side effects, they can also have serious interactions with prescription medication.
Yep.
So that's another sort of added element of complexity, that when you're taking a supplement, if you're just sort of taking it willy-nilly, not really talking to your prescribing physician, they may, if they may be knowledgeable enough to know that there may be a significant drug interaction. And so, kind of the stereotypical one in psychiatry is going to be St. John's wort. And that is a supplement I very, very rarely ever recommend. Specifically, it sort of induces the metabolism of other drugs, right? And so there are certain medications, sort of the classic example, if you're on a blood thinner and you take St. John's wort, it can drastically influence how the blood thinner actually affects you. And so it can lead to some really serious problems.
Yeah. And that's why, again, in my experience, I think people generally do best if they're going to do a supplement regimen that they really want to make a difference for them. If they do that in conjunction with a healthcare provider that really has done their homework and really has some good recommendations, because not only will it be more effective, but it'll be safer, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So those are our 5 areas of concern.
We got one more.
Oh,
we got one more. Yeah, the last one is that supplements can be expensive. And I really want to put a caveat here because it really depends on the supplement. It depends on the brand. And it depends on what you're comparing it to. So, when we're comparing it to, say, branded medication, supplements are obviously a lot less expensive. However, for a lot of my patients, they're already paying for health insurance. And so since they're getting that contracted rate with, say, a medication, a generic medication, they may only paying a couple bucks for a month's prescription of a medication. Whereas taking a supplement that might be also effective for whatever they're trying to treat might be 10, 20-fold actually higher in terms of cost on a monthly basis.
Now, is there a way that people can sometimes get that covered by an HSA?
Yeah, so there are ways, and so there are certain. You may not even need an HSA. There are certain supplements that an insurance company will actually pay for. So things like B12, things like vitamin D, right? Those things very standard sort of across the board. As long as your prescriber actually sends it in to the pharmacy, most likely it's going to get covered by the insurance company. But with an HSA, you're going to have a little bit more flexibility. If you don't know, an HSA is basically a health savings account. And so this is sort of pre and post tax dollars that you would get. And then as long as you get the prescriber to basically make the recommendation in paper, you can then go pay for that supplement with your HSA. And then, you can basically use tax-free dollars to pay for that supplement. So that can, for a lot of people, that can be a 30 to 40% basically cost savings for using that. So it's a little bit of a hack that I don't think a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah. And I think it's yet another reason to consider making your supplement decisions, at least the majority ones, and especially the more expensive ones, with a healthcare provider that really is in the know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we've been a little bit of a downer so far on supplements, but we really actually are big fans. And so let's go ahead and shift gears and talk about 5 of the pros of taking supplements. So Dr. Binus, why don't you cover the first one?
Sure. Before we do, let's just review the 5 downers, just so that our audience can remember those. So the lack of FDA control is the number 1. Number 2 is the lack of available research. Number 3, it can be confusing because there's so many things on the market, and which one do I choose? Number 4, there can be serious side effects, including interactions with other medications and liver damage, etc. And number 5, the cost. But like Jonathan said, we are actually big fans, but we just need to be aware of these pitfalls so that we don't fall into them. So, number 1 reason to actually take a supplement is that they can be very effective, actually. And the amazing thing is, I see this every day, and I'll even say this: I've seen it in my own life too.
Yeah.
If we know how to utilize supplements judiciously, in the right circumstances and for the right person and in the right doses, then they can really make a big difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Are there any, particular like classes of supplements that you find yourself using the most?
Well, for me personally, vitamin D.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just something that almost every patient that comes in, I'm going to either check their vitamin D status or tell them to take at least 2,000 units just as kind of a maintenance, because almost everybody is low in vitamin D. And, vitamin D it really is important. And low status can cause even cognitive issues, can affect the mood and other areas of your health. And so getting those levels up can actually help your mental health, cognitively, mood-wise, et cetera.
I do find it a little bit hypocritical that some providers, they'll easily recommend like a vitamin D or a B12 or a fish oil or something like that. And they won't recommend anything outside of that, but really they all kind of fall into similar categories. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, yes, it is a supplement. It's there to fix a defined nutritional deficiency, right? But a lot of these things can be as helpful, if not even more profoundly helpful and more noticeable than, say, even fixing your vitamin D levels. While there are definitely long-term benefits, a lot of patients that take, say, a vitamin D supplement may not even really notice much of a difference, in comparison. But it is a very important one.
And that is true. I think from a provider side, what I'm guessing is they haven't seen a lot of the other studies, and there
Sure.
and to be fair too, there are quite a few studies on vitamin D and health, and some of these other supplements are less known. There might be some, but maybe not as much, or maybe they're just not aware of that. But you're right. It's not really fair to just like focus in one area. How about you? Are there some specific ones that you've noticed that are really
used more often? Yeah. Predominantly the anxiety disorders. That's where I'm using supplements more often, simply because there's so many different ones, and so I get a little bit more of an opportunity to kind of pick and choose and use different doses and combinations of things in order to help people. And part of that is also there's just while there are some decent anxiety medications out there, some of those anxiety medications are not necessarily ideal. And so, using a combination of maybe some supplements and some non-addictive, non-habit forming medications can be a really a better combination for people than maybe, something that would be addictive.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've found that too. And what's amazing is that when you actually know how to synergistically use some of these products and put them together, it can have a profound effect on people's anxiety. And a lot of people that I've been working with recently that have been using actually a product that you came up with it's been really helpful and effective for a lot of them. So I definitely agree. And combining things like, inositol, magnesium, L-theanine, different things for anxiety can really make a big difference in someone's quality of life. And like you said, really bring down the amount of medication that someone needs to use. And a lot of those medications, even though they can be helpful for some of the symptoms, also have their own set of side effects, especially with the anxiety ones. A lot of them can cause long-term cognitive problems, frontal lobe disinhibition, that sort of thing.
So the second benefit to taking supplements, supplements are in and of themselves, that the name infers, they are supposed to be a supplement to a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, and so on. However, that being said, in the modern day era, not everybody can get exactly what they need from a dietary perspective. And so I realize, I want to be careful, I guess, with saying that, but sometimes it is far more convenient to say take a greens powder than it is to eat a green salad. Not saying it's equivalent necessarily, but for some people, that's just going to be a more reasonable approach. And while it's not an adequate replacement, it is better than nothing.
That's right. And just because you're going to do a green powder today because you didn't have time for a salad doesn't mean that you can't do a salad tomorrow. Right?
Exactly.
And so it can be something that can kind of supplement, that can, help boost and make our diet more full. I mean, one thing that came to mind as you were starting to talk about this was actually iodine. And I know we need to be careful not to overdo it with iodine because that can be harmful too. But in recent years, there's actually been less and less iodized salt out there. And iodine is an essential nutrient. We need it. We need it for thyroid function. It's very key. And so a lot of people are actually not getting enough iodine in their diet because they stopped using iodized salt. They want the pink stuff, the Himalayan sea salt, or not the Himalayan salt, or the sea salt that's not iodized, or whatever. And so that's just a simple example of how you want to be careful to make sure that you're getting what you need in your diet. And if you're not, then you need to take a little bit of a supplement.
Yeah. So being that supplements can offset some of the negative effects of an inadequate diet, the best way to fix an inadequate diet is to actually eat an adequate diet, right? But some of these things can obviously be helpful and supplement a healthy lifestyle. So the third benefit that we're going to talk about in regards to supplements is that, as we kind of alluded to before, yes, having countless options can be somewhat overwhelming, but it's also nice in that you have countless options. So if something doesn't work for you, there's many, potentially thousands of other options that you can choose from. So this leads to, at least in my practice, even though I don't use tons and tons of different supplements, there's a good variety of different things that I have available to me, with enough research behind it and enough experience that I've had with these things, where it allows me to have a certain level of flexibility and personalization for every unique individual.
Yeah, and one thing I like about that is that not only is it countless options as far as the number of different options, but also the number of combinations, because you can put different things together. It's almost like cooking, right? I mean, you can make, there's an infinite amount of recipes you could make, and similar with supplements too. And eventually, if you keep toying with things, oftentimes you can really fine tune things to get a much better result.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And the fourth thing is accessibility. So supplements are far more accessible. It's a lot easier to just jump online or go to your local grocer and pick up some supplements. There's nobody standing in your way saying you need an insurance card or a doctor that you need to go get a prescription from in order to get that supplement. So for a lot of people that maybe they don't have health insurance, or just even with health insurance, like going and seeing the doctor is still pretty expensive. Your prescription medications are pretty expensive. The supplement, buying a supplement or a few supplements or whatnot can be just that much easier to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you don't have those barriers. So it's like, okay, just click and buy, or go to your store and you can easily try different things. So what's our fifth one?
Our fifth one is that generally speaking, the side effects from most of the commonly available supplements are relatively minimal.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I mean, even though obviously we talked earlier that there can be side effects, they're usually a lot less harmful than some of the serious side effects that medication can cause. And so, there can be the more serious ones, like, liver damage, which even with kava kava, it's rare, but it can happen. But then you look at some of the meds and it's like, whoa, this can cause suicidal thoughts or this or that. And so, of course, side effects are of concern, but almost always much less concerning than medications.
And going back to what you said about using kind of a combination approach of maybe different supplements, like I, feel far more comfortable, say, mixing 10 different specific supplements than I would mixing 10 different medications, right? The potential for interaction, or at least a significant interaction with, or significant intolerance to, say, that many medications is going to be far more likely, right, than using a combination approach with supplements.
Absolutely. All right. So I'll review the 5 reasons to take supplements then. Number 1, they can be effective. And I mean, I think almost always people are going to find some sort of supplements that can help them in some way. Number 2, they can offset some of the negative effects of an inadequate diet. Number 3, lots of options. Number 4, accessibility. Number 5, generally minimal side effects. So in closing, Jonathan, would you have anything? What would be the summary, the take-home points for people?
My take-home points would be essentially, supplements should be included in general. I think in a lot of patients that are seeking to optimize their life and mental health, should be definitely a consideration in terms of a holistic approach, right? We've talked countless times on this podcast that you want to optimize your diet and your exercise and your sleep and your social activities and stuff. However, with all that being said, another aspect, I think, key component to a holistic therapeutic approach is going to be potentially including supplements in there as well.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it. And I hope all you listeners enjoyed this, and hope you find those perfect supplements for you.
Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.